controlling people. It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. Hans von Spakovsky will be with us shortly, senior legal analyst at the Heritage Foundation. And we're going to be talking about, well, what Charles Krauthammer talked about the other night and what we've been discussing even in the last hour with the abuse of power and when the president is the one abusing the power. Roll it.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about how the administration, particularly the president, seems to think that he has the right to change duly passed statutes on his own or to suspend whole parts of laws on his own. I mean, the Constitution is pretty clear. The president executes the law and the Congress passes the laws. So, for example, a few months ago, Obama decided that he wanted to postpone the employer mandate of his own law of Obamacare. You're not allowed to do that. You've got to change the law in Congress if you want to do it. And he did it, without hesitation. A year ago, he did some recess appointments you're allowed to do if the Senate isn't in session. The problem was the Senate was in session, and the courts have so ruled. This is a very cavalier attitude. But the worst part was what happened a couple of weeks ago when the president was really stung by the fact that there were all these cancellations of insurance policies. So Obama's own law is something that he ignores, and he encourages insurers and state insurance commissioners to allow to be violated. And the way he's been doing this, it's sort of the cavalier attitude I find absolutely astonishing.
When he said this, I thought of this man, the senior legal analyst at the Heritage Foundation and author of the book, Who's Counting? Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, welcome.
Well, thanks, Crane. It's good to be talking to you again.
Yeah, good to be talking to you. And it just, real quick, I got to point out, I know Dr. Krauthammer watches the show. Maybe he gets the podcast, but he's obviously been listening to us because we've been hitting this issue a lot, the credibility of the president, the abuse of power, and you've been all over it. And we even see it matriculate to the Senate and the changing of the rules when it comes to judicial nominees, as you've written about and talked about the stacking of the court. Here's my question. Actually, John Cornyn, Senator Cornyn, senior senator from Texas, addressed the credibility issue when a few callers who were on the Google forum that he was taking part in asked about Benghazi and the IRS abuse. And here's a little bit parts of what he said. Roll it.
I think the current administration has taken lying to a new level. To me, that's the one thing that I find most aggravating about what's happening in Washington these days, and particularly about this administration, which is a lack of accountability and the willingness to mislead people or provide them just demonstrably false information and expect to be able to move on. We've seen that most recently in the healthcare debate over if you like what you have, you can keep it. Something that we can go back to 2010 and demonstrate that the Department of Health and Human Services knew was false.
So, Hans, when the president not only misleads the American people, and I have said lie to knowingly mislead the American people, and then lies about the lie, but I digress, and then we have the record of him abusing his power, what are other than elections, what can we do as Americans, not Republicans, not conservatives, not liberals, not Democrats, as Americans to make sure that our president doesn't abuse his power?
Well, unfortunately, there isn't much that can be done other than elections. And, unfortunately, it's pretty clear that President Obama, when he got reelected, took that as an approval of the way he has conducted himself in office, and he's continued to act that way. And I mean, look, Charles Krauthammer put it really, really well, and so did Senator Cornyn, that, I mean, he tells the most outrageous lies, and when he's caught at it, he doesn't admit that he's done anything wrong. In fact, he denies it and just keeps right on going.
A part of this also is, as we're having the political discussion and he goes back to shape the narrative, we played a few clips from him earlier on in the show, and I detailed in 2 to 3 places where he did not tell the truth of the case that he was making. Clearly, the stats didn't back him up. And I sit back and say, how are we supposed to have a political discussion when we have arguably one side, and I would say that those would be the conservatives, and oftentimes Republicans are the part of that, and they are looking to have this honest discussion, and you've got a noise machine in the mainstream media as well as the left side of the political spectrum repeating lies over and over again. So I guess I'm asking a very general question. I feel like a student in your class, but Professor, what are we going to do about this? Because America's really it's you can't undermine the rule of law without impacting the foundation and unsettling it.
Well, look, it's a tough problem to do something about when you have someone who's willing to disregard the rules. One thing we have seen, though, is that the president and the Democratic Party, what do they respond to? They respond to political fears. And I have to tell you that I think one of the things the general public can do is to make a public outcry about these kinds of issues. And by that, I mean, they should flood their congressional representatives with complaints about this. They should write letters to the editor. When senators or congressmen are having town halls in their districts, they should go there and complain about it. That kind of messaging, eventually, that will get back to the White House. Most specifically, it will get to, for example, the Democrats in Congress who are very worried about the 2014 elections, and they start getting that kind of an overwhelming public response. Believe me, they will go talk to the White House about it.
Some people are, even last hour, had a wonderful call out of North Carolina. Donna called in and said, in essence, if you do get involved, there is at times a cost because the people in power may abuse that power. Now, we have examples of audits. We have examples, Dr. Benjamin Carson, with he was audited. Most recently, a person who spoke out against Obamacare has been audited. And we have the IRS and the targeting of conservative groups. What do you say to people that do want to get involved but have seen the tactics not only from the government but from leftists who go to homes, harass, do the thing called swatting with people they disagree with? There's a fear out there for the repercussions of it. And I guess 2 questions. 1, do you think the fear is justified? 2, what do you do about it?
There are instances where that fear very much is justified. We saw that with the way the IRS went after conservative organizations. But I think the thing for people to remember is there is strength in numbers. The way we've gotten things done in this country for a long, long time on a political basis is through associations. People getting together who share beliefs about particular issues. I mean, that's why, for example, people who believe in the Second Amendment, the National Rifle Association, other organizations like that, they're strong because of their membership, and those organizations, those advocacy organizations, can act as a barrier between the government and individual Americans because their donors, that's something, fortunately, that is secret. They don't have to reveal that to the government, and that's a way of still participating and getting things done, but trying to shield yourself a little bit from that kind of harassment.
And again, when you do participate, don't go to the level that you are being confronted with in the sense of the gutter-type attacks and politics. And Hans, you've experienced this. I can type in your name as I can type in Crane Durham, and things come up, and it is it's something where you sit there and go, who is this guy? Because I look at the person they're presenting and I go, well, this guy sounds wacky. And I'm speaking to myself, but they speak to the idea of you, for example. And they attempt to discredit you, try to marginalize you. They never focus in on actually what you're saying substantively. They never focus in, and they distort your record. So how has that been, if you don't mind me asking? But I think people would like to know about how you've endured it and on a personal level.
Well, I tell you, it hasn't been easy, and it hasn't been easy on my family. But in some ways, I have perspective on this that I think other folks don't. My father was Russian. My mother was German. She grew up in Nazi Germany. When she was 16, she was arrested by the Gestapo. My father had to deal with the secret police. And even though what I've had to endure for being a conservative who speaks up is unpleasant often, I always have thought, well, it's nothing in comparison to what my parents had to go through. And the other thing for folks to understand is when you're attacked like that, you've got to fight back. You've got to speak up even louder, because the whole point of that is, by the left, is to try to intimidate you and make you be quiet.
And they will put in the headline something that is false, and they will talk about, they'll try to shape that, and it's amazing. But you just referenced the fact of what your parents had gone through. And then I think about our founding fathers, what they risked in what they did by declaring independence, what they put on the line, in essence signing their death certificate, if you will, with the Declaration. And if we did not win, and I think about today of the battles that we are fighting, and I think the left has gotten over the last 40 years, has done a much better job of organizing, of understanding the importance of being on a school board, of understanding the importance not only of it nationally, but as I said, locally. And that's a place you can start. And that's a part of it, isn't it, Hans?
Oh, that absolutely is. People should understand that you don't have to be in Washington to make a difference. Local government, you can make a huge difference, particularly because it's really the states these days that are the most effective folks in fighting against what the federal government is trying to do. And that means getting involved in county government, city government, school boards particularly. That's important because that's where you're determining what's being taught to our kids. And those are areas where you can really make a difference.
And as you said, you can also make a difference at the polls and becoming part of that. And I do want to reference this because you don't have a lot of free time, Hans. I don't know if you have any, quite frankly, being the manager, Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation, as well as the senior legal fellow there, writing the book, Who's Counting. You spent time out, and writing a book takes a lot of time, a lot of hard work, and co-authored it with John Fund to focus in on voting and, in essence, giving some advice on how to get involved to make sure that we don't have our elections undermined by fraud.
Yeah, and I say to folks, listen, no matter what kind of work you do, whether you work at home, whether you work out for a company or have a business on your own, try to do a very important thing during elections. Take the time to take the one day you need to work in the polls on Election Day as an election official or be a poll watcher, because it's really important that we get good, principled people in there overseeing the election process.
For those people saying you're hyperbolic, Crane, about the president, it's a personal thing or whatever they want to say, it's not about that. It's not about personality. It's about policy, and not about R's or D's, but accountability. Bottom line, as you hear the president and you've seen the action in the form of immigration or the NRLB or the stacking of the court most recently and the nuclear option that going through with that in the Senate 2 weeks ago, tell me, are we seeing a level of corruption on the level of the Nixon administration right now?
I think so, in the way they're manipulating government agencies to accomplish political goals. I'm doing some research right now for another book, and even I, who work in Washington, see this stuff all the time, I'm just astounded at some of the things I'm learning that the administration has done, things that just don't get as much attention.
And Hans, I'm sure we're going to be reading about those and look forward to speaking with you about those. Hey, thanks for taking the time, not only with your legal expertise, but also your perspective and being in the fight that you have been in and that we are all a part of in making this country the very best it can be. Thank you, man. Great to be with you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation and Director, let me get this title right because you earn these titles, believe you me, Manager, Election Law Reform Initiative, Senior Legal Fellow. So, all right, there you have the perspective of what people have gone through, and that is something that we have to take into account. The other thing is you don't have to take on the entire agenda on a daily basis. There are so many things what you're passionate about that you can get involved in and be aware of. AFA is a part of that, certainly. Big time. AFR Talk, AFR Inspo. Another thing is when you do start making a difference, it starts to impact other people's lives, and do your part and allow God to take care of the rest. Oh, thank you, Crane. Did you just give me a pat on the head for that? Allow God. No, I'm serious because it can be overwhelming. I keep thinking back to that call, quite frankly, last hour about being overwhelmed with the information about who's telling the truth, who's not, and what happens. And the big thing, just get local. As I cover, the vast majority of things are national issues and impacting all of us as Americans without hyphens. And I get the idea that you can live in the sense of, look what President Obama's doing, look at the policies and how they're impacting. I get a lot of the fact that it's over. Well, it's not over. I also get the idea, well, we know how it's going to end. Yes, we do, but we don't know when it's going to end. And I believe that when you're hearing this broadcast, that there's a reason you're hearing it. Perhaps you have gifts that you haven't been using. Perhaps you're not focusing first and foremost that you are a creation of God, by God. He created you. He made you. And he has a plan for you. And quite frankly, with the resources that we have, and what has been taking place with a full frontal view of liberalism in the sense of economic policy, foreign policy, we're seeing it. We're seeing Carter on steroids. That's an image, isn't it? Jimmy Carter on steroids. Thank you. Thank you very much. So you get it. Our children are seeing these policies and seeing them devastate the job creation, the market, the overall. You say the market's going great, Crane. Well, do me a favor. Dan Celia has a show coming up a little later. Well, listen to Dan the Man Celia, but something that comes out. I was listening to, I think, to a promo of his, and he talked about the numbers that are coming out later on this week. He's going to detail this. He goes right through of the impact of what the reality is, and that's what you want. You want the reality. You want the truth. That's why nothing but truth. That's why you're listening. And yeah, I do have opinions. I do share my opinions, and I don't apologize for my opinions. Hopefully done in a respectful way. But if I'm saying something that you say, oh, that can't be true, well, then call me out. That's fine. But I got news for you. We've done the research. We have the truth. And quite frankly, you know the truth because you know what you're seeing isn't going to work. It hasn't worked. And our children are seeing it firsthand. So that means we can have a generation that is going to see the failure of liberalism as we know it, the failure of statism, the failure of driving God out of our society, of not recognizing that you need objective truth. You need the Word. And when you remove them, when you attempt to remove God, remember what Jerry Boyer said. It hasn't been about the state versus the individual. It's about the state removing God. Because if people start to recognize that power comes from God and our rights come from God, that means we don't look to government to rule us and be our daddy, because government is a terrible daddy. Our government is a government, if you want to call it a daddy, that allows for the baby to be killed in the womb. Think about that. I mean, it's not a good daddy. We have our government, daddy, paying Planned Parenthood. And when you try to tell the truth about Planned Parenthood, somehow you're a radical. You have a Hollywood set that is dedicated to leftist propaganda and the demonization of anything that doesn't go with their agenda, which is very much at odds with the pro-marriage agenda, with the pro-life agenda, with the pro-individual liberty and freedom agenda. And they're always looking to undermine what we have been as Americans. And you say, I don't believe it's conspiratorial. I think it's the Jason Bourne idea. Somehow that we are the problem. America's the problem. And you have to believe this in order to have and shape certain policies, as we've talked about with President Obama. Here's the point, and boiling it down, America is the example, the shining city on the hill. And our exceptionalism is the ability for us to recognize that government does not rule us, that we are a constitutional republic, that we may make some bad decisions in government and states, but we believe in freedom enough to have the opportunity to discuss those, and that you can arrive and be an American and equal under law and have dreams that God put into your heart and pursue those and achieve those. And the ability to do that. The belief that freedom is universal, understanding that the rights of the individual, our rights come from God. And we believe in that. We've spilled more blood in the liberation of others than we have in the sense of defending what is ours. Civil War, obviously, the greatest amount. Nonetheless, live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart. Always keep the faith in Jesus Christ.